Good day, class, and welcome to our lecture over visual aids in presentations. In this lecture, we will be covering the subjects of using visual aids, the different types of aids, basic guidelines when using slideware, and we will end the speech with guidelines for presenting with visual aids. Keep in mind that visuals are not necessarily a requirement when giving presentations, but with the increased use of technology in the education sector, the use of visual aids has become not only easier, but quite normal. In fact, when you observe most presentations today, it is quite normal to use aids of some sort. It seems rather the anomaly when some sort of visual aid is not used. To begin, let us first go over a basic understanding about their use. Presentation aids are a form or resource which are used to enhance the message of a presentation. They are often accompanied with speeches as a way to improve presentations in 4 basic ways. First, they tend to make the presentation much more interesting by enhancing the message by adding emphasis to your information and allowing for focuses on specific ideas. Second, it allows for the message to be more easily grasped as well as retained for a longer period of time. Visual aids help to improve the audience's understanding as well as their retention. For example, the use of pictures or imagery can serve in helping the audience's memory on a particular subject or point. Third, visual aids are useful in combating stage fright for the presenter. It allows the audience to shift their attention towards something other than the speaker during the speech. This is not to say you want the audience to completely ignore you as the speaker, but it allows them to move their eyes away from the presenter periodically so as not to be staring at the speaker the whole time. And lastly, the use of aids can enhance the credibility of the presenter. If the speaker is able to create and use high-quality presentation aids, it can add to the professional image of the speaker. Now that we have briefly examined the use of visual aids, let us now cover the many types which can be implemented in your presentations. The first type are objects or models which can be used. These make for great ways for dramatic impact because they may allow for actual demonstrations or recreations which are great for dramatic impact. For example, I once had a student give a persuasion speech on cutting down on your sugar intake. For this speech, she opened up by displaying a 12-ounce plastic cup used for frozen coffee drinks. She then proceeded to pour in approximately 8 tablespoons of sugar, filling up the cup almost halfway, explaining to the audience that when you consume one small frozen coffee drink, you are ingesting 8 tablespoons of sugar or 24 teaspoons of sugar, and you are doing this in just one sitting. This was a great use of an object to cause dramatization in her opening sequence for her speech, and it clearly grasped the attention of the audience. Now, there are a few things to keep in mind when using objects or models for a presentation. First, always observe the size of the object or objects you're using. The appropriateness of the size will really be determined by your subject. Second, never pass around objects during your speech. This will cause a distraction among your audience as they observe something or expect to observe something during your presentation which can distract them for listening to your speech. If you choose to distribute an object or objects, always do so as part of your conclusion of the presentation, never in the beginning or during. Also, when using an object or model, try to use one which has some form of movement as a way to make it more appealing to your audience. Another type of visual aid which can be used are photographs and drawings. These can be either displayed or be placed in slides, but whichever format they are used in, you should ensure they are good quality. For example, years ago, I was part of a presentation on Shakespeare where a giant painting representing one of his plays was displayed. The painting was used to illustrate the story of the play and made for dramatic effect for the speech. A third type of visual aid is the use of graphs and charts. Graphs are often used to share statistical data and patterns and are often used to explain complex series of numbers. There are several types of graphs which can be implemented depending on your topic. Line graphs, for example, make use of lines to show changes over time and space and are often used to show trends over time. Bar graphs are often vertical or horizontal bars which show comparisons among a number of topics or items and are often used to display differences between quantities. Pie graphs usually are used to highlight segments in the form of a circle to show distribution patterns and are often used to show proportional relationships. Charts, on the other hand, are often used to summarize large blocks of information, usually in the form of a list. They are used to simplify data or information in a clear manner. For example, sequence charts are used to explain the process of something. Diagrams are drawings or sketches that can outline or explain objects or ideas, or maps can be used to give understanding of places or regional characteristics. Our next type of visual aid is video recordings. These are often great to use because they allow for familiarity and entertainment to get the attention of the audience. YouTube, for example, allows for plenty of material for you to use and is easily implemented into your speeches. However, there are a few guidelines to consider when using video in your speeches. First, it is not often a good idea to use video during your speech. It should be relegated to either your introduction as an attention getter or to your conclusion as your clincher. When you begin your main portion of your presentation, you start your rate and flow of your speech, which the audience becomes accustomed to. If you decided to stop your speech and display a video, you break up that rate pattern you began with, which may cause the audience's listening to be disrupted. You should also use high-quality video by ensuring good resolution and sound. Using poor quality video can be harmful to your presentation. Your video should also be cued to the portion you want to use prior to the start of your presentation, and always be sure you give context to your video for clarity. And lastly, always make your video clips short, approximately 30 seconds. They should not take up large portions of time. Another type of visual aid you can use is yourself as the speaker. This can often be done by either using yourself as the model or dressing up in accordance with your topic. For example, during a cultural speech, one student chose to present on the culture of Vikings. She came in and presented her speech dressed in Viking apparel and artifacts as a way to display a visual aid on her topic. There are also what we refer to as low-tech presentation aids. These are often perceived as items such as dry erase boards, flip charts, or posters. Our last type of visual aid is perhaps the most common today, and that is slideware or slides. There are many types of slideware which are used today, the most notable ones being Microsoft PowerPoint, Google Slides, Canva, Zoho Show, and Prezi. Slideware is great because of its ease of use as well as its many options in implementing the many other visual aid types. You can use text, images, videos, audio, and so on. They allow for better visualization, they are more portable, and they allow for easy embedding for content. With the introduction on our topic of slideware, we will now move on to our third main point on guidelines for creating visual aids using slides. Since the use of slides is so common and relatively easy to use for speeches, we'll make one of your main points covering the basic guidelines when creating them. First, always be sure to prepare and practice with your slides well in advance. Trying to create slides for your presentation at the last minute can result in poor visual aids and a poor presentation. Second, always keep your slides simple and uncluttered. Do not overpower your slides with extreme uses of imagery, color, or text. Use a manageable amount of content and limit the use of distracting imagery such as GIFs or complex slide transitions. Third, always make sure your visuals in the slides are large enough for your audience to see clearly. Avoid the use of small pictures, videos, or images that will cause your audience to strain to look at. Fourth, limit the amount of text you use on your slides. Your text, if any, should be brief, succinct, and very limited. Keep in mind that your audience is there to listen and look. They are not there to read. If possible, use only single words or phrases rather than sentences. A common mistake I often observe is students who use their slides as if it is their notes or index cards. This is an improper use of slides. Remember, the slides are not meant for you. They are meant for your audience. Fifth, when using text, be sure to use effective font styles. Try to stay away from font styles that are exceptionally curvy or ribbon-like. These tend to be difficult to read. Stick with standard styles, which are much easier to read, such as Times New Roman, Georgia, or Arial. Also, make sure you are consistent with the font styles by using the same styles in all slides. Sixth, Be sure to use colors effectively by creating a consistent color theme in all slides. One of the best ways to make your slides attractive is the use of contrasting colors such as black and white, blue and yellow, or black and orange. There are some color combinations you want to avoid for a number of reasons. For example, you should always avoid using red and green or blue and green, as these are not only hard on the eyes, but those who may have color blindness may not be able to see these color combinations. You also want to avoid color combinations which make it hard to read, such as orange and red or white and yellow. As a general rule, you may want to refrain from using the color red as either a background or in text. Red background is very overpowering for the audience to look at, and red text often causes the eyes to strain, because in digital form it tends to look three-dimensional and hard to look at when reading. And lastly, always make sure to use images in a strategic manner. Think about the best placement of your image on the slide, considering the flow of the image if the slide also contains text. In some instances, the placement of images may be more appropriate if placed in the center or perhaps to the left or right of the slide. In other cases, it may be best to have your whole slide as a single image, or at other times to display multiple images on one slide. Whichever is the case, always make sure you place and arrange your images in a way that best fits your subject and is geared towards your audience. Now that we have covered the basic uses, types, and guidelines for creating visual aids, we will move on to our last main point and discuss guidelines for presenting your visual aids. One of the first things to make sure is that your visual aids are displayed in a way for the audience to see clearly. If using objects, models, charts, or anything that is physically present, be sure you display them in a way that is observable for the whole audience. Second, as mentioned previously, try to avoid passing around visual aids among the audience. This will easily lead to distractions and can prevent your audience from listening to the speech as they wait in expectation for the visual aid to come to them. Third, try to make it a habit when using visual aids to display them only while discussing them. In the case of objects or physical displays, it is a good habit to remove the visual aid once the speaker is done using it. The visual aid should be removed from the sight of the audience, perhaps to the side or behind a table. As for slides, this is a bit different since your slides will actually coincide with the information of your speech. However, when using slides that may be distracting, it is good practice to either switch the slide or to mute the slide till you move on to the next point. For example, in one class, I had a student presenting a very controversial topic, and in his opening of the speech, he displayed a very graphic and shocking image as a way to get the attention of the audience. This was not wrong, of course. It worked just as he intended, and he got the attention he was desiring. However, what he failed to do was to mute or switch the slide, instead choosing to leave it up for the class to view during the speech. This would result in great distraction, and over time began to anger the audience to the point that they were no longer listening, but were becoming irritated towards the speaker. If he had opened with the shocking image and either muted it or moved on to another slide, this would have been extremely effective, but instead it became more of a distraction. And one of the last things you want is for your audience to be distracted. Fourth, make sure the visual aids are clearly explained. Keep in mind that they do not explain themselves, and given that people have different perceptions, your visual aids can be perceived differently among your audience. Make sure to give context to your aids and do not say, "as you can see." You can see the visual aids. What they need is an explanation to understand how and why it connects to your topic. Fifth, when using visual aids, always make sure you speak to your audience and not to your visual aids. It is a very common habit for speakers to present their speech to their aides rather than to the audience, making it very awkward for the audience. For example, when students first begin to give speeches and use slides for their presentation, they can often spend the majority of their time looking behind themselves and reading or speaking to the slide. This is usually the case when you are nervous, because it is less stressful to look at slides and more stressful to look at your audience. Sixth, only use as many visual aids as necessary. Do not overload your speech with many visuals. Some students have a habit of using many more slides than are necessary, creating a feeling that they are rushing through the presentation as they glide through the many slides. For the most part, you do not need much for visual aids. A short speech will really only need approximately one slide for each main point, or perhaps one or two objects. Next, always make sure that you practice using your content. You may find that in practice, you get a better sense of what works or perhaps what doesn't. You also want to practice so that you are comfortable using your visual aids in your presentation. And lastly, to the best of your ability, try to check any and all equipment which affects your presentation aids. For example, if using slides, be sure to ensure your computer is adapted to the projector and the correct hookup equipment is installed. Following these basic guidelines should help to ensure that your visual aids will play a prominent and effective role in your presentation. And with that, we shall conclude our lecture over visual aids. We have gone over a brief understanding of how they can be used to improve your presentations, the many types which can be implemented, general guidelines regarding the creation of slides, and lastly, the guidelines for presenting them. Given the technology continues to advance and visual aids advance along with it, it is best to practice and try your best in using them for your speeches. Done correctly, they can make a great speech even better, but done poorly, they can derail even a fantastic speech.